In our marriage mentoring, I like to talk to couples about what each one of us is responsible for. And couples often get confused by this. And I think sometimes when we've been married a long time, it's very easy to blame our spouse for our actions. And or we try to take responsibility for their thoughts and feelings, and we try to fix them. Let me give you an example of this. So this is one couple we were working with, Nancy and Gary. So Nancy was home alone one night, and she got a call from a friend. And the friend said, "Hey, could you meet me over at this pizza place? Maybe we could just get together and talk." And Nancy thought that sounded like a great idea, so she left a note for her husband, Gary, and she went over to the pizza place. Now, when Gary got home, he expected her to be there, and he was angry that she wasn't there. So he made his way over to the restaurant, and he came in, he was yelling, he's being loud and confrontational, and the restaurant called the police. So the police came and quieted him down, and then he left, and he went and got in his car, and as he drove away, the police stopped him, and they pulled him out, and they arrested him for driving under the influence. And he was being handcuffed and loaded into the back of the squad car. And he turned to his wife and said, "This is all your fault." What was Gary really responsible for? And what was Nancy responsible for? So I want to talk a little bit about 5 things that I am responsible for. And then I'll come back and apply it back into this situation. I am responsible for my body. I'm responsible for clothes I wear, what I put on it. I'm responsible for what I eat and what I put in my body. I'm responsible for how I allow people to touch my body. And inside a marriage, you're responsible for the way that you want to be touched. And if you want to be touched in a certain way, you're responsible for communicating that to your spouse. Now, sometimes my wife will make a suggestion to me. She'll say something like, "Hey, Phil, you better put on some suntan lotion if you're going to go out and be in the sun all day." And now I am responsible for whether I take her suggestion or not. And there's been times I haven't, and I'll come home with a bad sunburn, and I tend to listen a little bit more now. But that was my responsibility. It wasn't her responsibility to put suntan lotion on me. I can also use my body to communicate. And I can communicate in a threatening way, or I can communicate in a partnering way. If I want to communicate love to my wife when she's talking to me, I could sit down, I could face her, and I could listen to her when she's speaking. Or if I sit and stare at my cell phone while she's talking, that's communicating that I'm not interested. I communicate with my body. I am responsible for my words. It says in Proverbs that speaking recklessly is like the thrust of a sword, but the words of the wise bring healing. What I say and how I say it communicates something, and I am responsible for how I say it and what I say. I'm responsible for my tone, my volume, my intensity. Nobody makes me raise my voice. And this one becomes difficult with couples. And it's very easy for us to lash out when we're hurt. And so then we sometimes lose control of our words. But I am responsible for apologizing when I do something poorly. I am responsible for my words. I am responsible for my thoughts. No one makes me think the way that I do. And the reality, though, is that our past relationship and our past experiences has influenced us, and we oftentimes think along certain lines based upon our background. But I am not bound by these negative messages that maybe others believe about me, or maybe I even believe about myself. My wife and I went for a walk this last weekend, and we crossed a busy street, and I looked both ways. And as I was doing it and walking across the street, I thought, I just did that automatically. I didn't have to think. It was been ingrained in my head since I was young to look both ways before crossing the street. And it's a good idea. It keeps you safe on a busy street. And I was thinking about my 3-year-old grandson and how we are trying to drill that same thought into him to look both ways before he crosses a street. And he's still learning. But I want him to do that so that he will be safe. But we've learned other things in our childhood that might not be very healthy. Like maybe you've got the message, you're just not important, or you're not worthy, or I can't trust others to be there for me, so I'll just build up walls. And these negative messages, they can run just as automatically as crossing the street. We don't even think about it. And then we react based upon these assumptions. And when something happens, they trigger us. I am responsible for my emotions. Now, this one's tougher to hear. You know, the phrase of "you make me so mad," that is a phrase that's not taking responsibility for your emotions. Nobody makes you feel a certain way. My wife and I were walking on the beach one time, and we saw these two kids. They were playing in the surf. Their dad was standing right there, and they were probably 3-4 years old, something like that. And a wave came and knocked them down. Now, one of them was crying, and the other one was laughing. Well, what was the difference? Same wave. It was how they perceived the wave and how they thought about it, and it caused an emotional reaction. Now, I am also responsible for how I express my feelings, and I can express my feelings in healthy ways or in unhealthy ways. I am responsible for my behavior, and there's always several possible reactions to any given stimulus. And I can manage my behavior, and particularly if I can identify my thoughts and feelings underneath my behavior. I told you the story about Gary and Nancy. So apply these principles to Gary and Nancy. Nobody made Gary be upset. He was angry because he chose to be by himself. No one made him get in his car and drive over to the restaurant, especially when he'd been drinking. He probably should not have been doing that. Nobody made him go in and yell at his wife so that the police were called. He was angry because he expected Nancy to be there when he got home. Now, he could have just as easily had the thought, you know what? She deserves some time out with friends. I'm glad that she's out. And I'm sad she's not here, but I look forward to seeing her when she gets back. I am responsible for my behavior. The good news is that we can retrain our brains. We can identify thoughts, and we can choose to think something else. Now, honestly, this can take some work, and it can take some self-reflection. And this can be a lifelong process to be thinking about, how is it we really think about stuff? But the Bible encourages us to think positive things, and the Holy Spirit can help renew our minds. And it says in Romans 12 to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In Philippians, it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is worthy of respect, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, think on those things. In other words, we can be transformed and choose what our thoughts are. And my prayer is, God, please align my thoughts with your thoughts. So tips for mentors. Encourage people to take responsibility. And when we're talking to couples, we'll draw responsibility, and we'll say you are responsible for your actions, your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors. And we'll explore the thought beneath the emotions. Can we find out kind of what the assumption is, or is it triggering something in you? Is there a thought from your past that triggers you to react in a certain way? And then be patient. It can take some time, and it can take some self-reflection, as I said before, to really understand your assumptions and why you react the way you do. So those 3 tips. Encourage people to take responsibility. Explore the thought underneath the feeling and the behavior. And be patient. Give grace to couples and give grace to people as they learn more about themselves.